Similar to what we talked about last week, it really does. It may be exactly the same lecture as the second half of last week. I apologize for that, but all the answers to your quiz should be in this lecture. I hope. Hope it is. According to Piaget, a baby is born with all its senses. Oh, this is chapter 5, by the way. We're talking about toddlerhood. Yeah, toddlerhood. According to Piaget, a baby is born with all its senses primed to take in new information. The baby organizes all the incoming data in the form of schemes that are added to and changed with new information. And these all become schemes. Mom comes in, I'm crying, she changes my diaper, I feel better, I stop crying. That's a scheme. I start crying because I'm hungry. Mom comes in and I start breastfeeding. That's a scheme. When I'm hungry, I cry. I get fed. When I need to be changed, when I'm uncomfortable, I cry, and mom changes my diaper, or dad, or whoever happens to be around, I guess. Right after birth, the newborn must operate in its world using its senses and its motor skills. This stage Piaget referred to as the sensorimotor stage. Why? Because it is primarily your senses and your motor skills that you're working on at this stage. The newborn will try to understand the world using its senses, especially its mouth. The stage runs from birth to 2 years, and everything goes into the mouth. And of course, uh, any babies don't have a clue what dirt is, so they'll put anything in their mouths, dog food, anything that they come across. Uh, if it has a flavor that they don't find disgusting, they'll put it in their mouths. Simple reflexes, the infant's first interactions with the world are through reflexive behavior. Hunger plus presence of nipple equal the rooting reflex, and so then it starts to drink. This is instinctual. The baby will root at birth, and that allows the baby to find sustenance. After about 1 month, the infant will begin developing habits and circular reactions. The habit is a scheme based on the reflex that becomes separated from its stimuli, sucking when a nipple isn't present. A circular reaction is a repetitive action, and that's all a circular reaction is. It's just a repetitive behavior. So, and this is one of the reasons why people use pacifiers. It's just a reflexive action, and you can get the baby to do it despite the fact it's not getting anything through the pacifier. An infant will begin participating in primary circular reaction. The infant will use its body in a repetitive manner. And this is my grandson at age 2 months. As you can see, he's kind of bald. And my daughter, who was a basketball player and a soccer player, put basketball and soccer socks on the little guy. At between 4 to 8 months, the child will begin participating in secondary circular reactions. The infant will go outside itself for stimulation, and this is when it starts playing with things outside of itself, such as rattles and whatnot. Between the 8th and the 12th month, the infant will begin coordinating its secondary circular reactions. The infant will begin mixing and matching its exploration of its environment. This is my grandson again, somewhere between the 8th and the 12th month. As you can see, he's walking. And who cares if he's got clothes on? He sure didn't. I'm sure he'll kill me if he ever figures out that I've put this in a lecture, but he's a cute little guy. Tertiary circular reactions develop between the 12th and 18th month. The infant starts exploring the properties of its environment. Internalization of schemes occurs between the 18th and 24th month. The child begins using symbols such as language to communicate at that stage. Between the 4th and 8th month, the baby will develop an understanding that just because someone or something is not there, it isn't gone. This is known as object permanence. My wife keeps telling me that dogs think that whenever you leave, that you'll leave forever and you may never come back. I'm not sure that that's true. Either that or my dogs don't care that I'm gone. But that's why they're so happy to see you come back. They thought they'd never see you again, according to my wife. She read that someplace. I'm not, like I said, I'm not sure that's really true. At about 18 months, most toddlers will begin to talk and gesture. Words and gestures are examples of the first stage of abstract thinking, the use of symbols. Children begin to engage in pretend play, and waving becomes a sign language of goodbye. Language is made up of individual sounds that are put together to make words that have meaning. These sounds are called phonemes. There are about 44 in the English language, depending on where you live. And I think I did this last time. Oops.
The key sounds of English, 44 phonemes and 4 blends. 18 consonant phonemes. B, k, d, f, g, j, o, n, p, s, t, z, w, y, z. 5 consonant digraph phonemes. N, j, ch, sh, th, and th. 16 vowel phonemes. A, e, I, a, a, e, I, o, u, ow, oi, ah, aw, 5 R-controlled phonemes. R, or, air, ear. 4 blends. Ur, qu, u, x, or gs. And here they all are on one page.
Okay. Okay, there we go, the English phonemes. When we put phonemes together, if the sounds we put together communicate, they are words or morphemes. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning. Carport has 2 morphemes. Roper has 2 morphemes. Carport, the 2 morphemes are car and port, and roper, rope, and telling you that somebody is roping. Sequence of early language development. As physical structures mature, children are able to make more and more sounds. Neuronal connections necessary to associate sound and meaning become activated. Social interaction with adults introduces babies to the communicative nature of speech. Sequence of language, prelinguistic speech, cooing and babbling. Cooing are the vowel sounds, and babbling are the vowel sounds plus the consonant sounds. Linguistic speech, hollow phrase, and telegraphic speech. Children learn language quite rapidly, a process referred to as fast mapping. One reason is because the parent tends to try to teach their child words by labeling objects when they are both looking at the item. This is known as joint attention. Noam Chomsky suggested an inborn language acquisition device programs children's brains to analyze the language they hear and to figure out its rules. This is known as nativism, and this is one of the reasons why, if you grew up with the Dene language, then you learned it better and easier than if you had to learn it later in life. Same way with English, it's the same way with any language, and that's known as nativism. The evidence is that the environment influences alone cannot explain the emergence of linguistic expression. The left hemisphere seems to be a critical portion of the brain for learning language. No other primate can learn language. Language acquisition must take place before the age of 12, where it only takes place with much effort and incompletely. First attempts to communicate at 10 months. After the first birthday, the child will engage in conversation with adults even if they're not saying any words. As the child ages, the language skills improves and the vocabulary will grow. Children simplify language. Children over-regularize rules. They apply them rigidly, not knowing that some rules have exceptions. Children understand grammatical relationships. They cannot yet express. Children will underextend word meanings. Children simplify language all day, all dry, hit ball. They apply them rigidly, not knowing that some rules have exceptions. I played with toy. I go to store. Children understand grammatical relationships they cannot yet express. I like you. When the world is mine, your death shall be quick and painless. Children underextend word meanings. Tanya won't let anyone else call their father daddy because that is what she calls her father, and he's the only daddy. Children overextend word meanings. Melissa calls all animals doggy because that is what her mother taught her to call her dog. Reading aloud, and I tease my grandson. I call his cat's doggy, and he really gets upset about it. He's 9, so it's not like I'm destroying his mind or something. But it's just a joke because his mother would do that when she was young. She would call all animals doggies because we had a dog and we didn't have anything else. Reading aloud to your child allows for opportunities for emotional intimacy and parent-child communication. Children who are read to often have better language skills at ages 2, 4, and 5, and better reading comprehension at age 7. According to Erickson in 1950, early experiences are key to developing either trust or mistrust. Sensitive, responsive, consistent caregiving leads to trust. Mistrust is developed when the infant's basic needs are not met. Autonomy versus shame and doubt leads to a shift from external to self-control. Negativism is the tendency to shout no just for the sake of resisting authority. And we usually see this in the terrible twos. Negativism may hit another peak between the 3.5 and 4, but will usually decline before entering school. And usually, kids these days are going to preschool, so that's about 3.5 to 4 years old, and then kindergarten at age 5 and first grade at age 6. Birth to 6 to 8 weeks, evolution has endowed a baby with many behaviors that elicit caregiving from the adult, crying, smiling, gazing intently into the parent's faces. The parent responds by holding and cuddling the baby. This creates an interactive system and is the first step in attachment. 6 to 8 weeks to 6 to 8 months, the first stage is the attachment and the making stage. Babies start to recognize and act differently around familiar and unfamiliar caregivers. They attach themselves to primary caregivers and cling to them when they are in distress or mock distress. 6 to 8 months to 18 months. By the seventh or eighth month, the child has usually singled out one of their caregivers as their favorite. It's usually their mother, but it doesn't have to be. It can be whoever's there the most. It can be their dad because their dad plays with them a little bit more physically than mom does. It can be a sibling, for example, if mom isn't around all the time and the sibling's taking care of the infant, then a lot of times it may be a sibling. The child will use the mother as a base to explore from, or their primary caregiver. The baby trusts the mother to be there. I'm reading a book right now where the mother has a child, and the 9-year-old daughter is the one that takes care of her most of the time and attends to her needs, and that is the individual that the child is adhering to. 18 months and older, the ever expanding cognitive and language skills of the child call for more and more interaction between the child and the parent. The child will and should take the initiative to initiate these interactions. Negotiation often takes place. There is a strong relationship between a father's close involvement with his baby and the baby's development. The father's involvement in caregiving has increased by 1/3 in a single generation. 1/4 of the U.S. fathers take care of their preschool age children, while the mother works, and nearly 1/5 are primary caregivers. Now, I started in psychology back in the 1970s. And since then, more and more women have not only started working, but we have more fathers that are taking care of their children. And this is something that I've observed over the last 50 years, is the fact that all of this has changed. So if we read a textbook, and of course I started teaching in the 90s, but if we read a textbook from the 1990s, we wouldn't be reading these kinds of things because things have actually changed from one generation to the next. I mean, they have changed markedly. Once upon a time, they tried to pass laws that women shouldn't work, that men should be the primary breadwinners, and that women needed to stay home if they had children. This was the biggest debate when I first started in psychology, was whether women could possibly work outside the home without destroying the children that she and her husband bore. U.S. fathers tend to play with their children in a more physical style, though this is not common in other countries. In the United States, it is the father's job to toughen up the kids, I guess. But U.S. fathers tend to be a little bit more physical with their children. Developing attachments, a reciprocal, enduring emotional tie. Secure attachment, the baby greets mom happily. Okay, this has to do with Ainsworth. Ainsworth did a study where the mother left. Okay, they brought the mother and the child into a room, and the mother played with the child for a number of minutes, and then the mother would leave. And what Ainsworth was doing was watching what the child did when the mother left. And then the mother came back, and she watched the child as the mother came back. So what she determined was that there were four different types of attachment. The secure attachment, when the mother came back, the baby greeted the mother happily when she returned. In avoidant attachment, the baby avoided the mom when she returned. She didn't want to have anything to do with her. In the ambivalent or resistant attachment, they were anxious even before the mother leaves, and they were ambivalent when she returned. In the disorganized, disoriented attachment, they were inconsistent and they had contradictory behavior. Mothers tend to be insensitive and intrusive or abusive. In the disorganized, disoriented attachment, they didn't know who the mother was going to act like, and therefore the baby didn't know how to react. Now, you can imagine that if the mother suffers from postpartum depression, that the baby has to learn to be on its own. and not to need the mother for any positive feelings. In that case, of course, the child may be more avoidant of the mother. Um, if the child is extremely needy, then they'll be anxious all the time. This is my niece that developed schizophrenia. This is the way she was all of she has been all of her life. She was anxious all the time, and she didn't really treat her mother very well, but she wanted her around all the time, almost as if to torture her. But secure attachment is the most common type of attachment. Erickson and other theorists feel that the infant-parent relationship lays the foundation for all later social relationships. Therefore, a child who experiences a secure relationship with their parents will be able to maintain this pattern of attachment throughout their lives. Insecure attachments may lead to other problems for the child due to problems in the parent-child relationship. If the parents maltreat the child, then of course that will lead to an insecure attachment. If the parent suffers from a mental illness or is alcoholic, then potentially it will lead to an insecure attachment. Researchers have determined that secure attachment is most likely to occur when the parents are responsive and sensitive. Babies who have difficult temperaments are less likely to develop secure attachment. Unfortunately, these difficult children do not elicit positive treatment from their parents. Research shows that these mothers can be trained to give their children the type of treatment that they need. But a lot of times, what happens with a difficult temperament from the child is that the parents have a difficult temperament as well. And for that reason, training them is a bit of a trick. I was told that I have already told you that my mother didn't like me very much when I was a kid, and she, my mother was a nurse, and she just loved she just loved babies, and so she had three kids before me, and she had no problems with any of the three of them. And then I came along, and and she was having all kinds of trouble with me. And she had a nurse friend that came over, and she said, she told my mother, Goody, her last name was Goodwin. She said, Goody, he acts just like you. The reason you two can't get along is because you're both too bullheaded. uh, she had two more kids, so evidently she wasn't worried about having another me or whatever. It's kind of funny though. We kind of stayed away from each other most of the time, but when she got older and when I became an adult, I was the person that she confided in. She told me just about everything that she was thinking. She felt like she could tell me, and I wouldn't take it the wrong way. And that may have been because we were so much alike. So I guess that's kind of fun, or not fun, however you like to look at things. Newborns are able to demonstrate their unhappiness by crying, flailing their arms, and stiffening their bodies. When babies need something, they cry. When they are feeling sociable, they smile or laugh. When their emotions are responded to, they react in a similar manner when the emotion occurs again. Smiling occurs spontaneously soon after birth, but is usually not tied to anything specific. Spontaneous smiling slowly decreases over the first 3 months. Responsive smiling begins the second week to stimulation, usually feeding. By the third week, the infant smiles in response to voices and faces because it gets such a positive response from people. Social smiling begins at about 1 month. Laughing begins in the fourth month to stimulation. Researchers have discovered that babies can show joy, sadness, interest, and fear at birth. Later, they show anger, surprise, and disgust, depending on the amount of emotional stimulation and the emotional display their caregivers have shown them. Body movement is also a good way of reading a baby's emotion. Turning the body away means that they are trying to ignore you. Turning their gaze away means that they don't like the stimulation that you're giving them. Babies rarely react negatively to strangers before the sixth month of age. Many children react more negatively to strangers around their eighth or ninth month, though it gradually decreases to their first year. Babies are less likely to act negatively if the mothers speak positively of the individual and they approach the baby slowly and playfully. While most children worldwide express the same basic complex emotions, in some cultures emotional expression is encouraged and in others it isn't. Research comparing American children with Chinese children showed that at 11 months, American children cried and smiled more than 11-month-old Chinese children because it is discouraged to show emotions in China as compared to the United States. When American children are given awards where they stand out, they feel proud in their personal achievement. In China, the same situation would elicit embarrassment and shame. This situation would be celebrated by honoring the entire class or even the entire school. If someone takes something from an American child, they are likely to show anger. In Buddhist countries, a child rarely shows anger for any reason whatsoever. And of course, this was a really serious problem that we had in Vietnam, which is primarily a Buddhist country. The vast majority of people are Buddhist. The the French had been there before, and they had tried to convert the country to Christianity. And of course, the French are Catholic. About 15% of the population were Catholic, and about 85% were Buddhist. Now, the problem was, of course, Catholicism wants you to show your emotion. So the people who had grown up with Catholicism over the last 200 years, while France controlled Indochina, they learned to be very expressive. And the Buddhists, of course, learned not to express any emotion whatsoever. So when the Americans came in during the Vietnam War and we were backing one side over the other. Unfortunately, the side that we were backing uh, was the one in power, and the one in power was the one that the French left in power. And that was primarily the Christian minority. Okay, so here we have the Christian minority, and we're backing the government, which is primarily Catholic. And of course, in when we were in Saigon or when we were around the South Vietnamese, who were part of the ruling class, then they showed emotion. But then when we went out in the countryside and we were wandering around the villages where the rice was grown and whatnot, we couldn't get people to show any emotion whatsoever. And because of that, a lot of times we misread what was going on. We thought that they hated us. We thought that they were lying to us because they wouldn't show any emotions. We thought that they were, lying or hating. So a lot of times, a lot of the interaction with the rural folk uh, turned out very negatively, and it was mainly because we were dealing with a population we had never dealt with before. Americans, there aren't that many Buddhists in the United States, and we really didn't understand what we were getting ourselves involved in. One of the basic means of surviving in a social world is to take cues for our behavior from others. Children begin doing this at birth, and we will continue it when we are in an unfamiliar or ambiguous situation. This is known as social referencing. This may be one reason why children often mimic their parents' phobias, because they are social referencing. This is how we know how to act when we go to a restaurant. Uh, it's a fancy restaurant, so we don't laugh and make a lot of noise, and we sit down and we're quiet because that's the way you do it there. If you go to McDonald's and there's a playground in McDonald's, then it's perfectly fine as soon as your meal is over to go in and play and make as much noise as you want to. Totally different situation. But of course, the children need to read this information from their parents. And this is known as social referencing, them knowing how to act in a fancy restaurant as compared to a regular restaurant. Now, this is really kind of interesting because my grandson, his father, that he visits from time to time, lives down in Florida, and his family is wealthy. So we're not. So we don't really go and eat at fancy places very often because, well, for one thing, it's too expensive, and for another thing, it's a lot easier to find a hamburger someplace or to find chicken strips or whatever, to find that at a less fancy restaurant. But when he goes down to Florida, he has to switch gears in his brain, and he has to start acting like his father's people, this wealthy family. And sometimes it's tough for him, and he gets yelled at. And here, of course, when he comes home, he goes out and he plays. And there, if when he comes home, because it's a totally different environment, he's supposed to not make a lot of noise. But of course, he's 9 years old. My goodness. But of course, that's not always easy for him. Social referencing. So how does he know how to act? Social referencing. And of course, this is something his father keeps telling him he needs to stop acting like he's in Iowa. He needs to start acting like he's in Florida, where it's crowded. I'll tell you, there's a lot more people down there than in Iowa. As children get older, they begin regulating their own emotions. A child is more likely to try to deal with their own fear as they get older than seek assistance. Children will use mental strategies to manage emotions, talking to themselves in order to control unwanted feelings. Not all children are able to regulate their emotions, and the ones who struggle tend to have problems interacting with others. Through the first year, children have been playing with their own toys. They will allow older people to play with them, but they don't really play well with their peers. About age 1, the child begins to be able to play alongside a peer who is playing with a similar toy or in a similar manner. The children will monitor each other's play, but they won't play with each other. This is known as parallel play. As the children approach their second birthday, they will begin playing together in a more organized fashion. In this play, they will accept specialized roles, and the play will follow specific themes. This type of play is referred to as cooperative play. Between the 15th and 18th month mark, the children will begin engaging in similar activities and talk and smile with one another while this takes place. This is known as simple social play. As children become older, their cooperative play becomes more and more intricate. Children will start using more imaginary themes in their play and will incorporate items that may take on some quite imaginary characteristics. And this is referred to as symbolic play. Okay. Researchers have discovered that symbolic play follows cultural precepts. American children tend to engage in more adventure and fantasy play, while Korean children play following more traditional values. Family themes with harmony more important than conflict. And of course, Americans are always looking for a fight. And that is the end of the chapter. I'm sorry that it was the same one that we talked about last week. Next week we'll certainly tackle something new. I'm certainly not going to go over the same material 3 weeks in a row. Anyway, next week we tackle chapter 6. So I'll see you next week.